New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring time and consciousness. With me is Dr. Julia Mossbridge, who is a visiting fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Novato, California. She is a visiting scholar in the psychology department at Northwestern University. She is also the science director at Focus at Will Labs, and she is an associate professor in integral and transpersonal psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She has also invented and patented Choice Compass, a physiologically based decision-making app. Dr. Mossbridge is also author of Unfolding the Perpetual Science of Your Soul's Work, and The Garden, an inside experiment, and co-authored with Imants Barous, Transcendent Mind, Rethinking the Science of Consciousness. Most recently, she has co-authored with Teresa Chung a new book related to time and consciousness called The Premonition Code, The Science of Precognition, How Sensing the Future Can Change Your Life. This interview is being recorded on Skype, so now I will switch over to the Skype video. Welcome, Julia. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, actually, and our topic of time is got to be one of the most fascinating subjects to explore, time and consciousness. The interesting thing to me about time is that in physics, it seems that time could just as easily go backwards as forwards, but in our normal day-to-day experience, virtually everybody has been indoctrinated to see time as pointing in only one direction, from past to future.
Thanks for having me here, Jeffrey. And yes, I agree. That is, within 1 minute, you've said the basic, you've stated the basic problem in this area very well. And I think this next century will be largely about, and I'm totally biased because I love time and I research time, right? But anyway, I think this next century will be largely about trying to understand this seeming disconnect between our daily waking experience of time and physical reality. Mm-hmm. And we're just starting to really get it that we don't understand it. And that's really the first step, right? To remedying some kind of disconnect or some kind of lack of understanding is really understanding how much you don't understand. And so I'm really good at talking about how much we don't understand about time. So if that's what you want me to do.
well, of course, we'll talk about what we do understand as well. And I suppose a starting point is that many philosophers and scientists say that our experience of time is totally conditioned by our nervous system and brain. And we may not be experiencing time as it actually is. In fact, we probably certainly are not.
Well, let's break that down a little bit. When you say as something actually is, what you're saying is you privilege something that we call physical reality as being the correct and true way, and our perceptual or experiential reality as being sort of something that's a little fuzzy.
Well, it could be the other way around, but
correct, right? It really could, and in fact, you'd have to argue conservatively, the thing that we have the most information about is whatever we experience, and in fact, conservatively, you would have to argue that, here on the table, I have this little ring, binder ring. My experience of this binder ring is primary. That's the first piece of information I have. The inference I make from that experience is that this binder ring actually exists out in the physical reality. But the most conservative stance is I have an experience of the binder ring, period. Yeah. Right? So I just wanted to rewrite your question a little bit so that it doesn't seem to privilege actually as something that is, truly inferential and not primary. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, let's assume that there's a physical reality out, because I don't even want to make the argument that there is a physical reality. Let's just, for the sake of argument, assume there is a physical reality outside of our experience, and that these inferences that we make about it mean something. There's clearly...
I was just going to say every single person has this notion that we're born as an infant, we grow big, and then we die. So the time is like really central. We don't even have a life without time.
Well, we don't have experience without time.
Yeah.
So even people, right. So let me answer your first question and then talk about that. So these are all good points, but let's break them down. Okay. So now, given the question of, there seems to be this clear experience of what we call a forward progression of events in our lives. And yet it's really hard to uphold that experience using physical truths, right? In fact, there's evidence that, in fact, time is symmetric and that events are information about events information about events, or events themselves are flowing in forward and backward directions. I have to put quotes because these are all our perceptions. And yes, every perception we have, here's the tricky thing, or maybe not so tricky, I don't know, it depends on who you are. But here's the piece that I think is really fascinating. When I talk to people about how time is limited by, for instance, our perceptual capabilities, that's much harder for people to understand generally, on average, than it is for me to say, not every electromagnetic wavelength is visible. When you say, you can't, not every form of light is visible, people go, yeah, there's those invisible parts. But with time, it's so personal. I mean, you hit it on the head when you said, we have the experience of, well, many of us don't have the memory of, but we have the experience of being born, of going through our lives, of eventually getting to the point where we're on the verge of death. That is so part of our story of who we are. I think it's very emotionally difficult for people to get it, that very story of who we are, our very identities, our very experience of reality, could potentially be limited by our perceptual abilities. And I understand that now after talking to people about it, that's an emotional statement. And, I'm not going to be able to get around the emotional component of that. So I just have to talk through it and say, yes, it's an emotional statement. But there's something really magical and wonderful about grasping that and then letting it go and recognizing that it doesn't destroy you as a person.
Yeah. I mean, I know it very viscerally right now because I'm applying for a new passport and I had to find my birth certificate. So there is a piece of paper that shows that on December 4th, 1946 in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin at 1:20 in the morning, I was born. Like it places me in time. It seems inescapable.
Yeah, now how many people are going to go do your horoscope for you based on that information? But that's the first thing I thought of. Right. I mean, it's clear that that's our experience. And even when people talk about these states of timelessness, when they go into a meditative state, or they say, oh, I was in a timeless state where space and time didn't exist. But then they'll tell you a story with this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened. Clearly, that's not a timeless story. Clearly, that's a story that has an order of events. And that's because the way we talk about experience is through time. I'm really not sure there's a difference between sort of the temporal flow of the order of events and conscious experience. And when we say time, what we generally mean is this order of events thing. Even though you can break that down and talk about time in multiple different ways, including duration and synchrony and things outside of space-time. So anyway, we could go there if you want. But it's fascinating how it's extremely difficult to describe an experience that doesn't invoke some kind of order.
Now, I've heard an old joke. It goes, why did God create time? And the answer is to keep everything from happening all at once.
All at once, right?
But for all we know, everything is happening all at once.
Well, it's not to us. I mean, so that's the thing, is that our experience is real. I mean, experiences are real things. So I think what you mean to say is, for all we know, in some other mode of like physicality that doesn't have consciousness, experience is happening all at once.
Well, because what you're saying, if I understand you,
everything is happening all at once. But what does it mean to happen if you don't have experience? I don't know. Sorry.
You seem to be saying that there is no privileged position, that our direct day-to-day experience is perfectly valid, and there may be some other very different perspective which is also perfectly valid. Correct.
Yeah. It's to a bee who could see different wavelengths of light than we can, their experience is different than ours. It's not like ours are the correct visible wavelengths of light and the bee is kind of off, right? It's a different way of perceiving physical reality. So, I think the reason I want to emphasize that so much is that, I think many physicists and scientists have been trained to believe that their job is to describe physical reality, and to believe that that's what they're actually doing. And I think that the only thing they can do is to describe their experience, because that's all they've got.
You started your career in neuroscience by investigating auditory phenomenon, and you discovered there even paradoxes involving time.
Yeah, actually, before that, I was studying pain and stress in the nervous system. And even there, I was looking at time, of oscillations of painful and stressful experiences over the day, over the week, over the lifespan. So I was thinking about that, but not doing a lot of research on that. But then, my research, when I actually started doing productive research, I was thinking about the auditory system. And part of, I think, what drew me to the auditory system was a recognition when I was working with whale communication and trying to understand killer whale calls and what was going on there. This recognition that this was a signal that was embedded in time. You could not separate temporal flow from these signals. Whereas in the visual system, here's a note on the table. You could look at the note, and really the temporal component is the time that it takes for those photons to reach your retina and for your visual cortex to do the processing. That's the time component of that. There's a time component, but it's not embedded in the signal. It's embedded in the time it takes for things to get done, right? The auditory system, if you think of like frequency on the y-axis and time, linear time on the x-axis, like a killer whale call is like, right? And so the meaning of the call is not just at the beginning, it's not in the middle, it's not in the end, it's in the shape over time. It is literally embedded. It's like a visual movement. The meaning is embedded in the order of events. So, and same with language. Same with anything that's in the auditory system. So that's why I started asking those questions in the auditory system, because here's a system that has to sort out time.
And I gather you discovered it's very tricky because some types of auditory signals take longer to process than others.
Well, yeah, it is tricky because it's not, we sort of have this idea that, when you're naive to how any kind of system works, it's easier to think that it's simple than when you actually get to know it, right? So that's probably good, because not everyone in the world wants to do auditory neuroscience or cognitive neuroscience or anything. But so when I started thinking about the brain and time, I was thinking there's got to be like a date time stamp that it basically, when something comes in, it goes stamp. Oh, it came in at this time, stamp, and then it can line them all up and put them all together.
The way a computer would do it.
Yeah, it's the way a computer would do it. What came in first? Well, that's the thing I'm going to present to consciousness. I'm going to tell consciousness that there was a snap, and then there was a clap, and this came in before, and then this came in. Turns out there's no date time stamp. It has to reconstruct what came in, and different sounds with different amounts of bandwidth, different amounts of information in them and going through different parts of this hacked thing that we call the nervous system, they're going to take different amounts of time to process. Meanwhile, the visual system operates at a completely different speed, and it's in another part of the brain. So it has to do its thing. Then the somatosensory system is doing its thing. And you have some kind of way, if you believe that the brain is making your conscious experience, which, we're all, probably everyone who is part of your audience is thinking, maybe that's not what's going on, and I'm right there with you. But if you believe the brain is representing to you some kind of experience of external reality, then you have to find a way that all these pieces are lined up and presented to you in some kind of sensible way that makes sense. It doesn't have to be a way that's accurate. It just has to be a way that makes sense and is consistent over time so you can learn language.
And right? Ultimately, for the survival of the species, it has to work.
It has to work. It has to be consistent. It just doesn't have to be accurate.
Yeah. Well, now you've also engaged in a series of meta-analyses of a whole important line of experiments in parapsychology that seem to show the nervous system is capable of registering a signal before the signal occurs. Yeah.
Now, is it registering a signal? Sorry, I keep questioning your questions, but I can't help myself. I'm very precise about language, but usually when others are speaking and when I speak, I'm like, whoa. So sorry about that. It's a habit. No,
please do it. It's fine. I like it.
It's like a training student's kind of habit, but I know you're not my student, so I hope you don't feel bad about it. So I would suggest that the results that I was looking at, which I'll explain in a second, have less to do with sensing a signal and more to do with sensing the future state of the organism. So, but here's the kind of experiments we were looking at. And it was one meta-analysis and then some follow-up discussions of that meta-analysis, as well as some reviews that I wrote with Dean Radin about precognition as a field. So first, just to talk about what precognition is, in case on the off chance people don't know, precognition is the scientific name for getting information about events in the future that's accurate. When that information is not obtained through sensory cues, or whether they're conscious or subconscious, not obtained through inference, logical inference, it's Tuesday and that means I'll go to work. That's not precognition. And is not obtained through direct cause. Like, I really love watermelon and I had a dream about watermelon and then I made myself watermelon for lunch. Not precognition. So precognition has those caveats in order to define it as the particular type of intuition. Now, presentiment, which is what the meta-analysis in 2012 that you're referring to, that I did with Patrizio Tresoldi at University of Padova and Jessica Otts at UC Irvine, that meta-analysis was focused on presentiment, or what we called predictive anticipatory activity, which we called presentiment to try to get it in the door of a mainstream press, which worked. So that meta-analysis is all about, and I'm going to use my hands to talk about time in a second, so I'm setting them up, is all about physiological, what Dean Radin calls presponses to events that are predicted by random number generator in the future. So no one on the planet knows what the next event is that a participant in one of these experiments is going to experience. No one on the planet knows. And even the software, depending on the random number generator, even the software doesn't know what this next event is. But you can see this pattern where the physiological system that is being continuously recorded during an experience where a person is sitting in front of a computer, you could see this pattern where the physiological system is seemingly responding differently in the seconds leading up to an emotional event, such as getting a guess right in a guessing game, or seeing a picture of someone pointing a gun at you. Those are both emotional events, versus a neutral or less emotional event, such as getting a guess wrong, which can be emotional but in the opposite direction, or seeing a picture of a sunset, which is just more neutral, less emotional. And you can see this consistently. We looked at 26 experiments. You can see this consistently across these experiments. And when you combine them using meta-analytic statistical tools, you can see that the chances of this, the possibility that this has occurred by chance, is rather small and convincingly small.
If I understand that research correctly, it's both the content of the stimulus and the precise timing of the stimulus that are both randomized.
It depends on the study.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the study. And the reason that it matters at all, whether that's the case methodologically, is that you could argue that someone might get into, so it has been argued, that someone might get into a physiological oscillation. So if you're not jittering the time of the event, you could say, oh, well, that's because they happen to be on this upsweep. The problem with that argument is it falls flat because first you run these experiments with multiple people who are going to have different oscillations. But second, let's say that there's something about the experiment that puts them into the same oscillatory state. Each person is getting a different series of random events, some of which are going to be these emotional ones, like pictures of the person with the gun pointing at you. Some are going to be the pictures of the sunset type ones. And those are going to happen at different times. So for some people, they'll be up at this peak, and for other people, they'll see the gun here, and for other person, they'll see the sunset here, which is going to wash it out, if that's the explanation. Yeah. So that's not a good explanation for the effect, but it's a nice try. But people have been trying for years to think of good reasons why this could happen. And so a lot of the explanations have to do with, over time you're seeing a lot of these, and it just could happen in this way where it works out that the order of these events is influencing. So I ended up wanting to do a series of experiments where I just did one trial, because it's really hard to make any of these arguments about oscillations or timing of stimuli or expectation effects that have to do with order of events when there's only one trial, right? So if it's really something that's going on, you just get a bunch of people, you give them each one trial, it's either an emotional or neutral one, and you compare across people. It's a more difficult setup because comparing across people never has as much power as statistically as comparing between groups. Across people doesn't have as much power as comparing within a person because you have more noise, but it's powerful in that all these explanations get thrown out. And so I did a couple studies just using one trial and showed this consistent gender difference that I had seen in the lab in two different physiological systems. So in changes in skin conductance, which has to do with sort of how much sweat your sort of arousal, and in changes in heartbeats. And this gender difference has been really fascinating to me. So I've been pursuing that, and hormone, potentially reproductive hormone differences. I'm very fascinated by where that could go. I'm self-experimenting with the hormones, so that's exciting.
And as I recall, I know the gender differences are complex and subtle, but I believe it shows that women who are younger seem to show less of this physiological precognition than men. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't want to put a nail in that coffin. I mean, so I sort of feel like that's what I've seen so far.
Yeah.
But another interpretation is they show it, but in the opposite direction. But still, I mean, I got to say that would be the correct interpretation of the two experiments that I've done that are sort of out there. But when I go look at non-physiological, so I sort of transitioned from physiological to behavioral stuff because I wanted to stretch it back further in time. Yeah. Physiology, you're looking at seconds, and I wanted to go further back to minutes. So I started going behavioral, which is where you could do that. So looking further back in time, I'm seeing these things where women are showing precognition just as much. These are all unconscious behavioral tasks. Yeah. It's all not conscious. Women are showing it, but in the opposite direction. So like where men may be showing one effect, women are showing the same effect, but in the opposite direction. Younger women.
Younger women.
Before menopause.
But when you say the opposite direction, I think what you mean is what is sometimes called psi missing. They seem to know the correct target, but then their response is opposite.
That would be the case on a conscious precognition task where you have a correct answer.
Yeah.
Right. But so some of Daryl Bem's unconscious or implicit precognition tasks, let me give you an example so that we can talk about this with an example in mind. He has a nice task called retroactive priming. So in a in the psychology world for decades, people have been doing forward priming tasks where you might see a word like an adjective like disgusting. And then a picture, like a girl that's licking an ice cream cone. And then the question that you have to respond to quickly is, was that a positive or negative picture? Well, it's harder to think that's a positive picture, which it is, as a girl licking an ice cream cone, when you just saw the word disgusting. So you're going to take longer to press the word positive on the keyboard, or the letter that stands for positive. If you saw the word delightful or delicious, it's just going to be faster. There's no cognitive dissonance, right? Okay, so that's a forward priming experiment. So you reverse it in time. Now, what he did, which was brilliant, was he said, let's show the picture. Now you have to classify whether that was positive or negative. After you classify whether it was positive or negative, now I'm going to show you an adjective that either matches or doesn't match. And what he showed was that the same effect was obtained, which is that you're slower in responding to your picture ranking when the picture was one way, positive or negative, and it didn't match, and the word that comes after your response was the other way. So that's a brilliant experiment that has now been replicated, I think, more than 15 times. And it doesn't always have a positive result or a significant result, but when you take them all together, you do show that it replicates. Okay, so that's that. So what I'm saying is, in that task, if what I have seen is both ways, so there's some kind of complicated story going on. So with some results, what I've found, and I'm working on a meta-analysis about this, but so far with some results, I see younger women absolutely going in the direction that Daryl originally published, and younger men going in the opposite direction. And in other studies of the same task, I see the swap. But it's like there's an agreement. If you do this, we're going to do this. I mean, it's bizarre. It's like there's an agreement on polarity, some kind of agreement on this is what we're going to do this time. It's bizarre. And it reminds me a little of the Atmanspacher stuff that you probably know about correlations being the thing that replicate rather than the actual result per se.
Oh, no, I'm actually not familiar with that work. Maybe for the benefit of our viewers, you could elaborate a little.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'll mess it up, but it's based on this. So I will not do it justice, but it's based on Atmanspacher's. Atmanspacher is at the IGPP in Freiburg, Germany, which is a really neat institution where there's a bunch of people studying parapsychology.
Yes,
at a high level.
The Institute for Grenzgebiete Psychology.
Yes, I don't speak German, so I was going with IGPP, but correct.
A very significant parapsychology research center in Freiburg, Germany.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have a collaborator there, Mark Whitman, and he invited me to go speak there about the Premonition Code book and that work, the work that we're talking about right now. And Atmanspacher was there, and we went up to dinner. Was he at dinner? I can't remember. And I get frustrated with that approach of the correlation approach. Let me tell you what basically the approach is and not go into detail. The idea is that people have a hard time replicating some psi experiments. And maybe that's because we're not supposed to be able to send a signal back in time. And so because of the no signaling theorem in quantum mechanics. And so but we still believe psi is real and we have evidence that it is. And so maybe one of the ways psi works is to create these correlations. Like I was talking about this gender correlation, gender age correlation. Yeah. And that it's the correlation itself that replicates at a rate higher than chance. It's not the direction of the correlation. It's not which things correlate with which things. The reason I get frustrated with that approach is I keep seeing this gender age thing literally being the thing that correlates and not other things. So to me, it feels like there's something there that's specific, but the direction of the correlation is different. So what does that mean? So anyway, I'm trying to figure this out.
Well, if only we had more researchers like other fields of science and more studies, we might be able to sort these things out better.
Well, I think we need much bigger numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, our ends are small, and I complain about that in the field, and my ends are still small. I mean, my biggest study has 2,400 people, but it's still small because what I was trying to do is chop those people up into individual difference experiments. So that number goes down really quickly once you look at the different factors. So, definitely funding for large scale studies would be great.
Mm-hmm. Now, you referred a moment ago to something in quantum physics called no signaling. The idea, if I understand it correctly, that it's simply not possible to use quantum entanglement, for example, to send an actual signal or message, which would mean faster than time or faster than light or backwards through time. And my understanding is that, yes, that's sort of a consensus today amongst quantum physicists, but I do know that there are researchers who are testing various strategies because they believe that might not be an absolute limit.
I think it's not even a consensus anymore. I mean, the more I read on it, and I'm not a physicist, but I keep in touch with that field for obvious reasons, but the more I read on no signaling and also on physical results in quantum mechanics. It seems clear to me that no signaling theorem. There's a great paper by, I think his name is John Kennedy, J.E. Kennedy. I think he wrote it in the 90s. I'm not sure, but anyway, you can Google it. But where he says, look, the no signaling theorem it's redundant. It was written to rule out. It was written explicitly to rule out something that people believe didn't exist. And so here's this thing that doesn't exist in nature. We better explain why quantum mechanics can't allow it. You see? But when you have evidence that precognition exists, and when you have evidence that retrocausality exists in physical systems, then you have a different world. So you're trying to explain a different world. So you end up, there's a really beautiful article by Hugh Price about using retrocausality and another author whose name I can't remember, using retrocausality to solve some of the problems of entanglement. And, still they believe that you can't, that is not the same as superluminal or faster than the speed of light signaling. So anyway, there's whole discussions about this. My take-home message, it's all fair game. No rules are sacred.
And I keep reading about new experiments every month that are endeavoring to break through that barrier.
Yeah, and it's not even a barrier. I think it might be a barrier that we erected ourselves. I never bought into that whole. I think I'm an empiricist. So, if you show me that you can do something, the rule that says that you can't is kind of useless.
Well, now speaking of empiricism, I think it's fair to include your own personal experience as empirical data. And I think that's what William James meant when he talked about radical empiricism. And I know in your case, you've written in your book, The Premonition Code, that you believe your life was saved by precognition.
Yeah, well, so just back to empiricism. It's not only fair to admit your experience as empirical evidence, it's all we have. What else are you admitting as empirical evidence? Like, I read the thermometer and it showed me it was 76 degrees Fahrenheit. That's your experience. I looked at my computer program that analyzed my quantum mechanical results and it showed me that the photons showed this pattern in their interference pattern. That's your experience. It's literally, we're stuck with our experience. So it's not just fair, it's the limiting factor. But in terms of my own, but there is a separation between experience that can be validated when other people do the same kind of experiment. So that's subjective experience that's validated by a third person. And an experience that is like, this is my story and no one else is going to have the dreams that I had because those were my dreams. They were inside, my experience. And so I get what you're saying.
It gets dismissed as anecdote.
Yeah, but of course, as every scientist in every field knows, the whole reason you go into science is because you have anecdotes. Now, a person who becomes a nuclear physicist has anecdotes where they have this experience of being completely on fire the first time they hear about fission, right? I mean, it's just like, that's where we get our passion. So whatever anecdote, that's only like the motivating force for the universe. But yeah. And the problem with anecdote is we can fool ourselves, and that's why it gets dismissed. So every story I have, like even I'll tell the story about where I felt that it saved my life. But every story that we have isn't as good as a controlled, rigorous scientific experiment, because what if I was fooling myself? And even in scientific experiments, we could fool ourselves, but it's just a little better. So here's the story. I think you're referring, actually, it's probably happened a couple times, but I think you're referring to when that fire fire story, right?
Well, I'm thinking of a dream where you were told to turn to the right and,
oh, no, that's my co-author, Teresa.
Oh, that's her dream. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. But you had one too. So you tell your story.
So this was actually different. This wasn't a dream. Since I was a kid, I've had precognitive dreams, which is why I'm even in this field at all.
Yes.
Just so they were very compelling. And my first dream that I remember, precognitive dream, was finding out that my friend Yishane had lost her watch on the playground. And that is what happened the next day at recess. Oh, and it was at recess. So there were these 3: Yishane, watch, playground, recess. 4, although we always had recess on the playground. So 3 correspondences between my dream. Sorry, I have to edit myself. 3 correspondences between the dream and the events. So I thought that was special. Mm-hmm. So it was about a watch, which I think is really interesting, just because that's a time thing, a timepiece. Having said that, so the dream in the book that I talk about wasn't a dream, and it was a compulsion. So it's like a precognitive compulsion is it's like a waking dream where instead of knowing something that is happening or going to happen, you know that you have to do something. Mm. So it's this action. I think some people call it the Psi mediated response kind of thing. Yeah. So I was waiting for my son to get home from school, and I was a little agitated, and I was at the kitchen sink doing dishes, and my son comes in, and I see that he's put his bike away because he doesn't have his bike with him, and he always rode home from school.
Yes.
Yeah. And at the time I was with my boyfriend, who is now my husband, and he was he's now fine, but he was at the time seemingly dying of a lung disease, and he had an oxygen tank. And so I was taking care of the household. And so my son comes in, and I start yelling at him, which is unusual for me. Clearly I'm agitated, and I don't really understand why, but I'm consciously thinking I'm mad at him because I don't think he locked the garage door. Hmm. So I say, Joseph, you go back and you lock the garage door, or at least check if you locked it. And he says, like, what? I just got home. And, we don't even live in a really bad neighborhood. Like, why is this so important right now? And I was like, just do it. Like, I can't believe you you have to take responsibility for your things, and you're not being conscious of your things. And I was just telling some kind of story, and none of it made any sense. I was very agitated. And my boyfriend, in between breaths, goes, Jules, just go to the garage and check it yourself if it's that big a deal. It's not even that far away. Because he's trying to, he can see that I'm being outrageously agitated for no reason at my son, who just is exhausted and came home from high school, or I guess 8th grade. And so I find, fine. So I go out to the garage, and the door's locked, and I'm like, still, I'm agitated. Like, the door's locked. He did the thing that I wanted him to do, but I'm agitated. I come back in the house, and on my way back in the house, I see the electrical meter, and it's on fire, and it's slowly building. And it's silent. It doesn't smell like anything. This is an electrical fire. And I see through the plate glass window that on the other side of where the electrical meter is of the wall is my boyfriend's oxygen tank. And I'm like, ah! So I run in the house. I turn off the electricity. I call the fire station. Everything's fine. But that compulsion that would not go away and that I thought was unreasonable, but it led me out of the house to see that. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I can say just parenthetically, my viewers have probably heard me talk about it elsewhere, that my whole life has been changed by dreams of that sort. Well, in my case, a dream that led to a compulsion. I acted out a dream back in 1972, and that's why today I'm doing media, which is another story. Do you want
to talk about, are you willing to talk about it, or do you not want to talk about it?
No, I can. I'll repeat it. Some viewers have probably heard it, but I was a graduate student in criminology at Berkeley. I was doing field work in San Quentin prison. I have a master's degree, in fact, but I wanted to switch from negative forms of human deviance to positive. And, the university at the time offered no opportunity. You could study crime and psychopathology all you wanted, but you couldn't really, at Berkeley, find an opportunity to study the things that interested me, which was mysticism, parapsychology, intuition, and creativity.
All the good stuff. Yeah.
So I struggled, and one day I had a dream. In fact, not only did I have a dream, I knew before going to bed that night that the answer was going to come in a dream. And I had this dream, and I woke up in the morning with this feeling of eureka. I found it, but I didn't know what it was. I actually had to act out the dream, and which was I was visiting some friends in Berkeley, knocked on the door of their apartment, but they weren't home. And in the dream, I knew where they kept the key. I took the key, let myself into their apartment. There in the middle of the living room floor was a magazine, and I picked it up, paged through it. The magazine was named I, E-Y-E.
Now, in the dream, you're telling me the dream or what happened?
This is the dream.
Both.
This is all the dream. Well, then I woke up at that moment feeling, this is the answer. But in order to find it, I had to run across Berkeley 5 miles to this married student housing, knock on the door of my friend's house. They were not home. And in fact, I knew where they kept the key. I let myself into their living room. There, as I had dreamt, was the magazine. It was not called I, it was called Focus. I was paging.
Pretty close.
Yeah. I was paging through the magazine in their house when it dawned on me that I could pursue my interests by getting involved in what this magazine was all about. It was the magazine of listener-sponsored radio and TV, public television and radio in the San Francisco area, KQED. And as I paged through it, I thought to myself, I could pursue my interests this way. So I went and volunteered at the local Berkeley Pacifica radio station, KPFA. And that was my start. I didn't own a radio or TV at the time. I didn't believe in electronic communication. I was a long-haired hippie, and I thought that the only authentic communication is face-to-face. But I changed my mind at that moment.
In a big way.
In a big way. And that was 45 years ago. And
wow.
that one dream really literally changed my life.
Okay, but what I love about that story, besides how beautiful it is, in addition, what makes it even richer is it contains the 3 most common forms of precognition in one story. So you had a waking flash of insight that tonight I'm going to have a dream that's going to answer. So that's one. Yeah. It's a waking precognitive flash that you're conscious of. 2, the precognitive dream, the most common form of precognition. And 3, the precognitive compulsion. Yeah. Where you not only get to have the dream, you have to actually have the compulsion. You have to actually have the urgency that it takes to get 5 miles away to do the thing. Yeah. So, yeah, way to go.
So all of that happened. And of course, it raises, when we talk about precognition, a lot of people have trouble with it because they say, well, if I can predict the future, it means the future's already happened. And if that's the case, I don't have any free will.
Right. Let's talk about that. Yeah. That is I've been traveling, doing a book tour around the country for the Premonition Code. And the number one question that I would say comes up repeatedly is, what does this have to do with free will, and do we have any free will? And the funny thing is, and the thing I kind of keep forgetting to say but keep thinking about, so I want to say it clearly here, so I'll try as many times as it takes to say clearly. But I think it's completely orthogonal. I think whether things are predetermined or not is completely orthogonal to free will, by which I mean has nothing to do with free will. And so let me run down the argument for you here. And see if this makes sense. Okay, let's imagine that everything's predetermined. So already we know that tomorrow I'm gonna, hop in the car and go see my friend, and every single event is predetermined. So let's imagine that. So there's a situation in which you could imagine having free will in that situation, which is I already am going to decide, and I truly will decide that I want to go visit my friend, and that will be my decision. And yet the universe is aware that will be my decision. And so that happens, right? There's also a way in which I could not have free will in that situation. The universe or something else outside of me is sort of forcing me to just have the experience of deciding that I'm going to go visit my friend. But it has already decided that it will force me to have that experience. So you see how it has nothing, like you could imagine free will or no free will in the same situation of predeterminism. And the same thing goes for things not being predetermined. If nothing's predetermined, you could still imagine not having free will. So nothing's predetermined. We have no idea what's going to happen. And also, you don't get to choose what happens. Right? So does that make sense? We confuse this idea of free will with predeterminism or no predeterminism. And it's completely not the same thing. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. I probably in my mind would conceptualize it differently. The way I think of it is that our notions of free will and determinism are, they're human notions that we have developed because of our history and our nervous systems. And I suspect that reality is just far more complex than we humans are even capable of conceiving.
Yeah, I think that's possibly the same thing with a different spin. Yeah. We don't know, but we tell these stories about it. And I think the funniest thing about free will is people focus a lot on the will part of the free part, but not so much as on the I part. Who is it that we're talking about that we think has free will? Is it our bodies? Is it our brains? Is it our minds? Is it this universal consciousness thing? And so let's ask about the we or the I, because that's really, the answer is really going to depend on that. I think not so much on how you define free will. Actually, it depends on all of it, of course, but let's put a little more focus on that.
And there it seems to me that you're getting into really the mystical literature addresses that question more thoroughly than any other literature I'm familiar with. Which
is funny, because if you start reading quantum mechanics, this question of like, who is the mind or who is the consciousness that's collapsing the wave function comes up, and then you realize, you need an answer to that question, and it's not right now in science, and it is in the mystical literature, and they're not talking to each other so much, although more now than before, right?
Well, the founders of quantum physics, people like Schrodinger, and
they were reading mystical literature.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, yeah. Born Schrodinger, yeah.
For sure. And you have joined, as I recall, a new organization which is dedicated to promoting what I would call idealist metaphysics.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I like idealist. I'm not sure it's okay. Yeah, I'm not sure it's idealist. I think it's just post-materialist.
Okay.
So that's what we agreed on for the title, because some of us are not idealists. I'm not an idealist.
There are a number of options.
Yeah, materialism isn't the only option. That's the point. And it's called the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences. And part of, some of us think that the physical world absolutely exists, including me. And that it's not primary, or probably not primary. I would say I'm 99% sure that we have all the evidence we need to say that the physical world is not primary. So, yeah, it's a great organization started by Gary Schwartz and a group of other folks, including myself, who came together. But Gary Schwartz and Marjorie Wollicott, neuroscientists from the University of Oregon, really spearheaded it and sort of herded the cats into a room to try to make this happen. And we're hoping that it is a mentorship and service organization that helps a lot of people. So,
well, back to precognition and time and consciousness. You are developing a model for helping people to become what you call positive precogs.
Yes.
Yes. And you write very eloquently about all the benefits for somebody who might want to do that, which is interesting because there are so many warnings about even people who say, oh, yes, precognition is real, but don't mess with it. You might get yourself into trouble.
And you might. I mean, so we put warnings in the book and on the website, too. So because it's true that you might, if you're not psychologically stable or you come from a family with a history of mental illness, like I do, you have to be careful because if you have any tendency to have a difficult if you have difficulty keeping yourself from being delusional, so I don't have that problem, but I could, given my family history, so someone else could, then once you start clearly getting information about future events and you convince yourself that that's actually happening in a rigorous way multiple times, you can kind of go nuts with it. And that's not helpful. And it also, by the way, isn't helpful for your precognitive ability, right? Yeah. Staying very grounded and staying aware of your own limits is really helpful for precognition, whereas getting egoic about it or saying I'm God and I'm omniscient and I'm omnipotent, it's not going to help you at all. So, so yes, I think those warnings are important, but the way that they're phrased is often like, oh, completely stay away. This is a taboo thing and it's going to mess you up and it might be the devil's work or something like that. Those kind of warnings are not what we have in the book because we don't believe that's the case. It's just like, no, just like anything that is important. So I think precognition is, my co-author and I, Teresa Chung, and I both think precognition is important for the future of humanity. Just like anything that's important and powerful, you have to be careful when you use it, especially something that changes your worldview and your perspective so drastically once you start really practicing it. So the point of the positive precog movement that we wanted to create with the book and the website is to put a frame around precognition that avoids the two most popular problems when people talk about precognition. So one problem is among non-scientists who often want to make it something special. Like, let me tell you about my story about precognition and how special I am or how creepy it was. So we want to make it special or creepy. And while it is special in the sense that it's really interesting and considered anomalous, it's so common that it's almost like when someone says to you, let me tell you how I sat down on a piano and played Mary Had a Little Lamb. You're like, why would you want to tell me that? Why don't you go take piano lessons and learn how to play the Moonlight Sonata, right? And but we treat it as if it's something that, oh, this thing happened and it's weird, and we're going to put it in this camp of things that I don't understand, right? And then we have this other camp from scientists who are not familiar with the literature often and who say, well, that's just crazy or pseudoscience. And so the idea of the book and the website are to say, nope. So precognition is scientifically validated. Precognition is something that can be useful. Precognition is something that can be dangerous if you don't use it right, but it's not that dangerous generally for most people. And here's a way to sit down and actually create a conscious practice of controlled precognition, like you would have a meditation practice. Because something that's really cool about precognition is not only is it useful in your life, like just your regular life, it's useful to know that someone's going to cancel a meeting, right? It's not only useful in your regular life, it changes you in a really positive way for most people if they could stay grounded, because you know your mind. So as long as you're practicing a kind of controlled precognition, or what we call in the book controlled precognition, is really a subset of remote viewing. So a kind of controlled precognition where you could have a right and wrong answer. So you could learn from failing. And you don't get to make an excuse like, oh, well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. No, when you fail, like you get to fail, and that's okay. And that's part of the practice of seeing and learning. Oh, when my mind demands that something is true and starts building castles in the sky, I can learn over time that that's almost always going to be false, right? And you start to learn it and almost play games with, and almost feel like you're getting jokes told to you by your subconscious or your superconscious minds. I mean, almost like you're developing this relationship that with your future self, where you feel a strength in knowing your whole self and knowing the silly parts of yourself and the disgusting part of yourself and the part of yourself that wants to be really good at this and can't stand that it fails. And all those parts come to play. So it's like a meditation practice, but with feedback.
You tell a wonderful story in your book about a biologist at UC Santa Cruz, Dammer, I believe, who worked with my old friend David Deemer in coming up with a whole new model of the origin of life itself. So very important scientific work, but he had a conversation with his future selves that seemed, as a child, you describe it, and how that changed his life. Could you tell that story? Yeah,
and Bruce and I are friends largely because we had similar experiences. So I wanted to tell his story rather than mine because he puts it it's kind of adorable. So I think he was 10 or 11, and he was taking a walk to celebrate his birthday, and he had the experience. It's better put in the book because he edited it, so it was really accurate. So this is a shadow of what's in the book. But basically, he had the experience of seeing his future selves line up. And he said to them, I want you to sign a contract. And he put up an imaginary contract for them. I want you to sign this contract that says you will always send positive energy back to your littler selves because they were always doing the best they could. Mm-hmm. And that's so powerful. So what happened was they all signed the contract and he felt this whoosh of energy toward his future. And the reason that's so powerful, creating a relationship with your future selves in which it's a positive and loving relationship, mm-hmm. is that what you're saying is, I don't have to do everything right now. I don't have to be everything right now. I get to allow that things will come to me and shift with time. And I get to allow my future to unfold instead of always struggling against, oh, I don't have this or I don't have that. It's like, it's a different solution to the problem of suffering. Mm-hmm. That may be more accessible to people in the West than saying, just be unattached to anything, right? The solution is, you don't have to have it all right now because you have this future self exists.
Yeah.
And this future self has something that you don't have. At least it has the knowledge of what happened in the intervening years, right? And so there's something powerful about that. And I'm working on another book about that relationship specifically, but that's the relationship that you can develop with precognition when you sit down and have it be a practice. And I don't know how to emphasize how beautiful it is, except for to say that's why that story's in there, is to emphasize how beautiful that is.
It reminds me, actually, I haven't even thought about this for probably 50 years. When I was very young, like 20 years old, I got a tape recorder and I began making a diary, talking into the tape recorder, and I was talking to my future self. And because at the time I knew I was, kind of wild and crazy, and my future self would probably look at my 20-year-old behavior disapprovingly. And I was saying to my future self, don't judge me, because who I am now is going to be the basis of who you become.
Yeah. I did the same thing. I wrote letters like that every year to my future self about I think you're going to be like this, but I was just projecting other images of other adults onto my future self, Yeah. But it's a really powerful part of success in life, is being able to make that relationship to yourself across time. Yeah, it's really cool.
Very powerful and profound. And you've talked about how you and your co-author, Teresa Chung, how involving yourself in studying and practicing precognition has had many other positive benefits in your life.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when I was first doing it, it was for two ends. So one end was, look, I'm studying this stuff. I want to sit down and actually train myself, right? So that was one end. It's like being an ethnomusicologist and saying, I'm going to learn sitar, right? I want to understand it better from a scientific point of view so I can experience it myself to do that. And then the other end was, it's going to be great because I'm going to maybe make money with it, or I might, I might use it for these various, I really do use it. I don't use notifications on certain apps on my phone. Instead, I just decide whether I'm going to look. And, I oftentimes have gotten a call exactly at a time when I needed to that I would have missed and I couldn't have had the opportunity or whatever, just because I looked at that time. That's a fun way to interact with the world. You're really alive when you don't need something else to tell you when you should be doing something or what you should be doing. So those were the two ends, and those are great and those are working, and that's wonderful. But I didn't realize that there was going to be this other transformation, which is this transformation of connection to myself, which, interestingly enough, when you connect to yourself, you can only connect to yourself really authentically with love, with unconditional love. And then as soon as you have unconditional love for yourself, simultaneous to that, it's not a stepwise process, but simultaneous to having unconditional love for yourself, which, by the way, I can't say that I always access, but often, way more often now than before. Simultaneous to that, there's unconditional love for other people. And the moment you stop unconditionally loving yourself at any point in time, that cuts it off. So there's no differentiation between self and other when it comes to unconditional love. So connecting with yourself over time is roughly equivalent to connecting, in my experience, with others at the same time. So there is a reason, I think, why when people get good at precognition, they're also pretty good telepaths. Because once you master, not master, but no one's mastered it, but once you get better at this temporal piece, the spatial piece comes with it with no difference. And I think it's because of the connection love piece, but I'm not sure.
Well, you have written that you feel there is some connection between the nature of time itself and the nature of love.
Yeah. That's a big puzzle for me because it's hard to put into words, but it does feel that there's that. And I can't wait to find out what I mean by that.
Well, I somehow they are connected. I have that same intuition. I don't think I can articulate it. Oh, yes.
Yeah. There's something there, and question mark.
Yeah.
Fun to explore.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I suppose ultimately it has something to do with who we are, but which is the deep mystery. Let me bring up another topic. I know you have a professional relationship with my old friend Marty Rosenblatt, the founder of the Applied Precognition Project.
Yeah, I love Marty.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what you're doing with Marty?
Yeah, he has an organization that's a offshoot from APP that's being run by a friend of his who's a more businessy guy. Marty's an investor guy, but less an entrepreneur guy. Mm-hmm. But Michael Austin is his name, and he's running something called Soul Rider, and they're experimenting with the idea of creating an investment fund using precognition. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of their advisors. And we're talking about different approaches. And one of the approaches might be to use something like the website I have for premonition code. One of the things that I tried to do with the website for premonition code, the part that's called the positive precog training part, where there's just a richness, there's a rich array of resources there. But one of the resources is a practice platform that anyone for free can use. And it uses a random number generator to select an image that's your target image that you're trying to foresee using precognition, controlled precognition. It takes you through the steps, and the steps are also written in chapter 5 in the book as well. But the point is, it doesn't do it the way Marty does it. So the way Marty does it is people self-judge their ability they sketch out whatever they've sensed and stuff, and then they judge against two pictures, and they're trying to figure out which of the two pictures is the target. The problem is you get a bunch of precogs looking at any two pictures, one of which is the target. It's very easy to think that the wrong picture is the target. It takes a lot of work for people to not see the wrong picture, right?
It's called displacement.
It's called displacement.
Yeah.
And so I kind of don't love the word displacement because it suggests that there's a signal that's displacing, and I'm not sure about this whole signal thing.
But let me back up for just a second so that our viewers know. I have 3 interviews in the archives with Marty, but what he has been doing for over a decade is using what's known as the associative remote viewing protocol for making small speculations in financial markets and in athletic events.
Yep. That's right. And he's been fairly successful. Mm-hmm. And that's why he's considering building out this organization. So, but this problem of self-judging, because precogs tend to see things all over time, not just the final picture, which corresponds to the change in the market or the outcome of the sporting game, is that they can be wrong a lot more than one would want. And so what I created was in this training was just one picture. And the way you self-judge is you have 2 graphs. I show people 2 graphs of 2 possible targets. One corresponds to the correct target, although the software doesn't know which one is the correct target at the point you're looking at the graphs. The other corresponds to another target that is not the correct target. And you don't know which is which. No one on the planet knows which is which. The software doesn't know which is which. And so your job is to figure out which of these graphs shows the elements. I have, I think, 8 elements there. Which of these elements are present in your sketch or your description of the future target? and they're mutually exclusive. So if this one has an animal or a human in it, then this graph will have no animal or human in it. So if you had an animal or human in target, you're going to be better off picking the one that has animal or human. And so then after you pick, then the software chooses one of them to be the target. And so you only see one picture. So I'm hoping people seem to like it because of the lack of displacement. But what I'm hoping is that people can actually perform better on it. And that remains to be seen, because people have to first get used to the protocol and deal with these graphs, which they've never dealt with before. So it's a struggle for people to learn the new thing, but I think it might pay off. We'll see.
Well, in your website, you talk about your vision for what you're endeavoring to do by even establishing a category called positive precogs. And what you describe sounds like it's very visionary. It would mean I would call it a real change in the way humanity organizes itself, which is that people with highly skilled precognitive abilities would become central to many different areas of human endeavor, including medicine, including financial forecasting, law enforcement,
education, governments, you name it. Every field. Yeah, I mean, so I think we're coming to a point in human history that what's going to get us out of our situation are these skills that have been laying dormant and underdeveloped. And I'm super excited about the movie Arrival, which I saw 7 times. Yeah.
I've seen it 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, here we have a female scientist, so already I'm in. Like, forget what the rest of the movie about. Meanwhile, she's saving the world, so that's good. Yeah. And then she's doing it by using essentially time travel, mental time travel. So I mean, I don't want to give any other spoilers, but I think that's a description of where we need to go. That's being able to use these kind of skills: telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, precognition, mediumship. I think being able to use these skills and having them be part of our economy, having them be part of what we train our children to do, how to manage them, that's going to save humanity. So that's my conviction. I could be completely wrong.
Well, I share that conviction with you, Julia. I really do. And I support your work. I want to encourage all of my viewers to visit your website. Can you give the URL?
Oh, sure. Yes. thepremonitioncode.com. And you click on positive precog training if you want the training. You click on events if you want to hear about events. You click on, it's pretty self-explanatory, but those are the 2 really important ones.
Well, I subscribe to your vision, and I think any of my viewers who are interested in having an opportunity to practice precognition will enjoy visiting your website, and who knows what might come of it. I know your goal is to identify people who are more than 80% accurate in these precognition tests. So I hope you can.
Or who are very good. They don't have to be more than 80%. But they, people who are really into it and who want to practice and who are skilled. That's very interesting. But also, I want to just allow everyone to practice. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a wonderful ambition, a wonderful vision. And Julia Mossbridge, thank you so much for sharing this time with me. This has been incredibly exciting. I look forward to being able to do more interviews with you in the future.
Thanks. I love it. It's been really great, Jeffrey. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the new Thinking Aloud magazine, or order a beautiful printed copy.